going to go start at the very namesake place for the Manhattan Project, that is Manhattan, where it really did begin, with the offices at 270 Broadway, and with a big role played by Columbia University. Our first speaker is James Ford, who remembers working in the Nash Garage building.
I'm not clear why I'm in this group with the distinguished scientists at this table and in the audience, but I'm here and I was there. Some of you will be surprised that I was a participant in the Manhattan Project via the Unemployment Insurance Bureau. I graduated from high school quite young, and I had a year's experience in a chemical laboratory in Long Island City. And when that job closed out, I was on unemployment insurance. And for those of you who don't know, when you're on unemployment insurance, they're supposed to send you out on jobs to see if you'd qualify and so on. And it turns out that they sent me to carbon and carbide because I had this year's experience as a laboratory assistant. And I was just a high school graduate, so I was not a scientist. And ended up at this big, ugly-looking building on Broadway and 132nd Street, which was I guess a former place for Nash automobiles. And I was a laboratory assistant there. And my major, or just about the only job that I had while I was there, was cleaning the pipes. There were pipes that had a metallic sheath. And as I think I learned later, these metallic sheaths were used to try to distinguish between the U-235s and the U-238s, and I guess that was what they were experimenting on. The only scientist that I remember there was Al Meyerson, and I don't know if any of you, and I don't know if Larry remembers Al or not. He was the only one that I remembered. When they finally dropped the bomb, I read about it in the newspaper, and I said, "Oh, that's what I was working on." And that's how much it was kept a secret. It was a good experience for me. I have some mixed feelings about the bomb. I obviously was extremely pleased that it ended the war. And then I began to think about the toll of the people who were killed by it. And I had some mixed feelings then about it. And then watching the History Channel, and I looked at what England did to Dresden, and it looked just like what had happened in the atomic bomb, except it took a number of weeks and months to do what the bomb did in one day. And I guess I just came to realize that there is no humane way to wage war. So I think I'm becoming a pacifist. At any rate, my later experience had nothing to do with working on the Manhattan Project. I had a talk with my granddaughter today, and she was surprised that my schooling was free. In those days, if you lived in New York City and you had the right grades, you could go to college without cost. And she was amazed at that. And I don't know why we don't have that these days. Wow. I didn't mean to make a political statement. At any rate, I went on from there, and I had a very interesting life. I don't know if any of you know about Willowbrook. I worked at Willowbrook for a while after they had their disastrous period where they were really not taking care of the developmentally disabled. And I worked there for a while. And I worked in other parts of the mental health system. And my last major program was as the public health director in San Diego County in California. I am in complete awe at the men who have already spoken and the men that are going to follow me in terms of what they were able to do, and I stand in appreciation for what they've done and the way they ended the war. Thank you.
We're actually going alphabetically, so next is Dieter Guen.
I did not know that I was supposed to talk today. Just found it out as I came here and thought about what to say, whether to relate details of my experiences at Oak Ridge or maybe take a little broader view of what brought us all together. So I'm going to take the liberty of having the mic to choose what I'm going to say in the context of this occasion that has taken so much work, and there have been so many people involved. And I just wanted to thank, particularly, Mrs. Kelly for all of the work and vision and determination that it has taken to bring us together today. I served on the Manhattan Project at Oak Ridge in what was called the Y12 plant that was responsible for the production of the kilograms of uranium-235 for the Hiroshima bomb. When I arrived at Y12 in September of 1944, the Calutrons, a huge number of huge machines used for the electromagnetic separation of uranium-235, these machines had a catastrophic failure, and they were just being reassembled and put together again after repairs carried out by the Alice Chalmers Corporation because they had shorted out in their original configuration. So from the end of September 1942 to about April or May of 1945, so in about 6 months, the alpha and the beta calutrons produced the tens of kilograms of uranium-235 necessary to build a bomb. So all of that was done, actually produced, in a period of about 6 months. Of course, it took a much longer time to get everything ready for that. Now, few people remember that the uranium bomb had never been tested, unlike, as you heard before, the plutonium bomb that was tested at Alamogordo and at the Trinity site. I'm sorry, somebody's trying to reach me. Sorry about that. That bomb had been tested, but the uranium bomb had never been tested. And so Hiroshima was the test of the bomb. So if you think about it, the uranium bomb is really a relatively straightforward way of getting into the atomic bomb business. And this lesson that was learned in World War II was not lost on a man by the name of Saddam Hussein. And it was not lost, as we know today, on the Iranians. The Iranians, of course, are using a much more advanced technology compared to the calutrons, the centrifuge to separate their uranium-235. But Saddam Hussein, actually in the 80s, duplicated the Y-12 facility that I worked on in 1944 in a place called Taimyr in Iraq. And so he was intent on producing an atomic bomb as he had earlier with a reactor that was bombed actually by the Israelis in 1980. And then later in the decade, he switched over to calutrons, and he duplicated essentially the size of the Y-12 plant in Taimyr in Iraq. And I think it is something that we ought to remember, particularly today, because the Iranians are trying to do the same thing with a different technology. Now, how do we know about this plant in Taimyr? It was discovered in more or less an accident. I don't know how many of you remember an excursion or a war that we fought in 1990 called Desert Storm, when Iraq had invaded Kuwait. And we had sent bombers into Iraq, and one of the bombers blew the roof off a very large building, and a subsequent reconnaissance flight, which was interpreted by intelligence agents in this country, they saw the calutrons in that building. So after Desert Storm ended, American inspectors went over there to take a look at that plant. And they found these huge numbers of calutrons, and Hussein was fairly close to being able to get enough uranium to build a bomb. So this is the kind of picture that I thought I might evoke in you to see how the work that was done on the Manhattan Project during World War II is now, it bore fruit or almost bore fruit in Iraq, and the Iranians, seeing that if you build a plant above ground is not such a good idea, they put theirs so deep underground that it would be essentially impossible to destroy what they're doing. So this is something that is present, it is concerning us, and I think that the kind of history that is being preserved by the Atomic Heritage Foundation is going to be important to keep the consciousness of what can be done, what was done with this technology, which could be done, and to enable us to get a better perspective of what this is all about. So that's what I wanted to tell you.
Thank you very much. We try to spring these things on our speakers. Just let them know as they walk in the door. Sorry about that. That was beautiful. Larry, you are next. Larry O'Rourke is half of the photo on the opening page of your program, in the midst of the Oak Ridge, I don't know, is that winter? Anyway, but he and Bill Tooze were lifelong friends that, and he and Bill actually worked maybe with James. They may have passed each other in the Nash Garage building. We haven't figured that one out, but Larry, why don't you take it from there?
Thank you, Cindy. I guess Steve Jobs started out in the garage. It is not necessarily a disadvantage. We are constantly surprised by the diligence and ability of Cindy, and it's absolutely true. I don't think either Bill and I knew we would address you until we sat down and read the menu. But my son David was kind enough to drive me here today from Pennsylvania. Said, "That's all right. You're never at a loss for words." Well, I'm willing to challenge Cindy's 2 a.m. deadline, but I won't try. I'm blessed with one positive in describing, what we may have done, because Bill and I, for a long time, did the same thing. So I can kind of intro, and Bill can fill in. Like others that I've heard tonight, and I was brought into the project by way of selection from the military ranks. I was completed my infantry basic training in Camp Roberts, California, and expected to go to the Pacific, but I was shunted to Ohio State University to study graduate mechanical engineer. And as we're a larger group from different Army bases around the country, and several from overseas. And there was not a mechanical engineer in the group. We were chemists and physicists and chemical engineers, and I was selected to go to see Captain Grochin and make an inquiry. You never stick your Army neck out, but I went to Captain Grochin and I said, "Captain Grochin, none of us are mechanical engineer graduates." And he said, "O'Rourke, do you want to go back to Camp Roberts?" And I said, no, we don't. And so we studied after lights out, 11 o'clock at night, with a flashlight and a mechanical engineering book, and trying to learn basic mechanical engineering so we could go to the next class in graduate mechanical engineering. It developed that it was a facade, and we were being weeded out to join the Manhattan Project. There are a lot of interesting, to me, details, but I'll shorten that a good deal. It formed, and I think we'll hear more about this tomorrow. It formed a special engineering department, and personnel were brought in from various Army installations and groups, or people were essentially drafted from their workplaces in universities and businesses and put into the Army directly without any basic training. And we were corporals and sergeants and staff sergeants. And I saw a couple of master sergeants, but I never knew who they were. What Bill and I did, the heart of the separation of the uranium-235 and the uranium-238 is accomplished by gasifying the uranium, the natural uranium, into a very corrosive gas, but effective gas called uranium hexafluoride. And because in the constancy of energy, those are particulates who have a larger mass will move at a slower pace through space in order to have a constant energy. Therefore, uranium-235 hexafluoride gas molecule will move faster than will a uranium-238 hexafluoride molecule. That's the whole heart of the separation of uranium-235 in the gaseous diffusion process. There were 3 other processes in Oak Ridge, but the largest and probably the most famous was the K-25 plant at Oak Ridge. And what was being mentioned as a tube was gustily being cleaned properly. and
Thank you, Larry, for telling me what I was doing. I didn't know.
We never knew each other at the Pupine physics labs or the garage. But I did got to tell you one thing. Cindy brought us together in spirit, and we corresponded by email, and I got a wonderful email from him, and it was so beautifully constructed and so complete in description that I told him when we were on the phone for the first time, I said, "You should have majored in English composition." Do you remember that?
And I tell you, I did.
That's right. That's what happened. That's exactly what happened. Well, I got a big kick out of that one. Well, so here this material, what he's cleaning up, and actually it's in a tubular form, but this much in diameter, and Bill and I get a piece about this big, and our job was to test it, and because of this difference in velocity, relatively, if you impinge a natural uranium against a barrier that it's porous, relatively, the 235 molecule will move faster because it must have constant energy. It will move faster than the heavier U-238 molecule, and therefore it will impinge upon that surface more frequently relatively. Well, if you do this about 4,000 times under the proper conditions, you can come up with an enriched U-235 sufficient for ballistics. Now, Bill and I would receive this material, and I'm going to let Bill handle the rest of it, because Bill, honestly, Bill was better at this than I was, because I could tell and when we worked shift, and when I'd come in and look at how many barriers Bill had tested, I couldn't believe how he could do it. He must have done at least 35, 40% more every night than I did. And well, I'll leave exactly how we did it up to him. We tested this with certain gases, which were analogous to the relative velocities and masses of the isotopes, and people were working frantically elsewhere to produce a barrier that had molecules in it that were essentially the diameter of a uranium hexafluoride molecule, and not much bigger and not smaller, because if it were smaller, it wouldn't go through, and if they were bigger, you'd get laminar, unmixed, undifferentiated flow, and you would get a very inefficient thing. So the barrier was being manufactured, and we'd get sample after sample after sample, and we could tell from the results of our testing how efficient it was. But there was no way we didn't discuss this with anybody. We turned in our results. At one time, I was seconded out to where they were making this barrier in Decatur, Illinois, at a Huda Hershey plant, in order to build some equipment and teach them how to do it, so they didn't have to send the samples all the way back to Columbia. And it was on that occasion that I received, along with the other workers there, an address from General Leslie R. Groves, which was the most stimulating, intimidating talk I ever heard in my life. He really, I can't describe the personality of that man. And he put the fear of God in you if you stop working hard on that barrier out there. Then Bill will fill in the rest until the time we went to Oak Ridge. And we lived in a barracks, and eventually we moved to a recreation, or to a dormitory hall, and roomed together, and worked together, and danced together, as that little book shows. But he found the right girl and married her, and I'm not going to identify the young lady who's in there in my picture. Just hope my son never shows it to my wife. Because I'll tell you, Bill and I had some good times. It wasn't all danger and lurking intelligence. We kind of grew up together. And one last quick thing. This fraternity of special engineering people, of which several have already been heard from and others exist here, is one of the great lifetime experiences any of us could have. There are 1,250 of us at Oak Ridge, and I think more than 3,000 altogether, Cindy, in the other locations. And I have with me a list of the 1,250 at Oak Ridge according to the colleges. I had them listed by colleges. And CCNY was mentioned, and I want to tell you there were more CCNY boys in there than any other school. They were smart as hell. And there's one college in there, there's the one that only has one guy there, and that's me, Canisius College. And there's another guy who only has one guy in there, and that's Bill Tooze, who went to Uppsala. So over to you, Bill. I guess Bill is next.
Well, that's a hard act to follow. But I do want to, while we're on that subject, ask each one of you to open your book to the first page. And there you will see Larry and the girl that Audrey said Larry and his date of the month, and me and the girl I married. And I wanted to go back well beyond the Manhattan Project to December 7th, 1941. It was a beautiful Sunday. I lived in Livingston, New Jersey, and was driving back to East Orange, where Upsala College was located. And once I got off the Jersey Hills, I turned on the radio, and Lowell Thomas was on. And he was describing how the Japanese had attacked our naval forces at Pearl Harbor. And it didn't take long to find out that they had essentially destroyed all of our battleships and battle cruisers in the Pacific. It was a horrendous defeat for us and a great victory for Japan. I went on to college and we talked, and sometime in the late afternoon, it was announced that the president would address the nation at 9 or 10 o'clock the following morning. And President Roosevelt, in one of his best speeches, and he was a superb orator, started with the words, "Yesterday, December 7th, the Japanese attacked our country in a date that will live in infamy." He went on to document the fact that the Japanese carriers had to have left 10 days before, at a time when we were meeting with the Japanese. And he asked Congress to declare a state of war between the Empire of Japan and the United States of America. It took Congress about 11 hours, which is fantastically fast for Congress, to declare war. There was one negative vote. A woman who just didn't believe in war. And that's the last time that we had Congress declare war. The president asked them to. It's the last war we won. And when you get people together to talk about nuclear weapons, I don't know how many of you have heard this story. We always seem to get in and at the time we dropped the bomb and ignore the fact that that was one hellaciously bloody war. Another thing about it, for 2 days, the United States and Japan were at war. We were not involved in the European war. Then Germany and Japan declared war on us. And I said Japan, Italy. And that might be considered the time that World War II really was started. Enough of that. I want to talk about the work that the SED did to help win World War II. Larry and I first worked at Columbia. And we had strict rules that emanated from General Groves. He said, I want each individual to know every last thing that they need to know to do their job and nothing else. And we operated on that basis. Now, somehow or other, we got a lot of the information, and no one would ever say how it was osmosis, I guess. But the whole country, I don't know if you all realize that everybody works 6 days a week, 8 hours a day. And there was no overtime for the Saturday. I recall looking at my wife's paycheck. She wasn't my wife then, but she worked at Y12. And on the week that they dropped the bomb, she worked, I think, 18 hours overtime. That's over the 24. You know what I mean. We had 3 processes going at Oak Ridge to enrich uranium. They were separated from each other. And that's the reason my friend down here says that it was only Y12 at X10 was concerned. It was a pilot plant for the it was part of the plutonium bomb. And we had a unit that involved liquid thermal liquid separation and K-25 gaseous diffusion. At the end of the war, the liquid thermal diffusion plant and the K-25 plant were hooked in series and fed the beta calutrons. By the end of the war, the alpha calutrons were shut down. And it was a tremendous success to see the war come to an end. I think that we have an awful lot of people who are against the atomic bomb. But if you go back to the time that we had finished the battles leading up to the bomb, and you asked anyone in this country if they should drop the bomb or not, it would have been universal. Anything we could do to win the war, we wanted to do. If you asked the Japanese, they had an attitude. It may have been a religion, it was a national feeling that to surrender was the worst thing a Japanese could do. They would much rather die for the emperor. And that attitude is not recognized today. I'm getting off my pulpit. And I want to encourage you to look at this picture here. It was a warm Sunday in December. The war was over. Larry had a car.
No, the girl had the car.
Your girl had a car.
That's why she was there.
And the description that Audrey had of that was, there's Bill and the girl he married, and Larry, and his date of the month. There were one heck of a lot of marriages in Oak Ridge. And
That's enough, Bill.
no, I wanted to call the fact that, when it comes to the baby boomer situation, we boom more than anybody. And I have my daughter here, he has his son, and a couple of my very good friends. And I've said enough.
Well, thank you very much, Bill and Larry and Dieter and James for sharing your memories. Even I just had such confidence that you guys were not at a loss for words and would come through. It's terrific. We're now going to have another changing of the guard to invite those who worked at Chicago and Hanford. Oh, well, is there a pressing question? I have one. Okay. You have a mic loudly.
I'm Teresa Wilhelm Malda. Dr. Harlan Wilhelm was my grandfather. He invented the Ames process at Iowa State. And my question is, and his team developed 2 million pounds of uranium, pure uranium, for the Manhattan Project. And I'm wondering, were any of you involved in the training by his team on the Ames process at Oak Ridge? Because I know that teams traveled there to do training.
No, not me.
No?
I don't think you
Did
were
any of
the...
you know him by chance?
What was his name again?
Dr. Harley Wilhelm, who was under Spedding and Arthur Thompson at NET.
The name's well known, but I never associated with them.
Right. So I'm trying to track down more information on the Ames process and the training that occurred.
there was a man by the name of Spedding, Frank Spedding. Yes, I knew him.
Good, all right, we've made a connection here. Okay, any other, I really want to make sure that we all have a chance, you all have a chance to mix and mingle at the end of the day, because I know you probably have a lot of questions you want to ask of many of the other speakers as well. So why don't we thank our current panel and